Hey guys, welcome back to the Starting to Scale podcast. This week we have another fantastic guest on the show. Really excited to kind of delve into his history, his background, and what he does for entrepreneurs in Amsterdam and the Netherlands. Some really good insight here. I think it'll be valuable for anyone who wants to start a business, who has started a business and wants to learn more. So welcome to the show, Kees.
Thank you. Thank you for this too kind introduction.
It's going to be a really positive episode, I think, Kees, and obviously I'm excited to find out a little bit about you. We've had a chat off air and kind of gone through your background, but just for everyone out there now who's kind of listening in, can we just take it back, because it's a funny one for you. You kind of knew from a very early age what you wanted to do and where you wanted to go.
Yeah. When I was younger, my granddad has his own company, and I always respected that a lot. So I always, when they ask you in primary school, what do you want to be? Most people want to be a policeman or a fireman or something like that. And I always said I wanted to be a director because I didn't know the word entrepreneur. Because I looked up to my granddad a lot. Yeah. Because I remember going to his house on Friday mornings and then walking to the factory together, and he's saying hello to everyone and all the stories he had about how he built his business. So that was really interesting. So I always had tons of respect. So yeah, I think that urge started really early on in life.
Yeah. And at what point, obviously, you went to university and kind of graduated from there? At what point did you really go, right, now I'm going to push towards being, an entrepreneur or that kind of environment?
I think I did two internships right after university. The first one was at eBuddy, which was an online instant message aggregator where I was a business analyst. And that was my first taste of the startup culture and startup world, which was really interesting. And afterwards, I joined ABN AMRO Bank in their incubator, where I helped build several projects/startups from an internal perspective of a big company. So that was my first taste of entrepreneurship. Yeah.
And you mentioned there, incubator. What kind of, just explain that term for people who maybe aren't familiar with the startup ecosystem as such.
So an incubator is an environment where, at least at ABN AMRO, they had a group of people trying to build new businesses where ABN AMRO was the full or a partial shareholder in. This was a company incubator where everybody just was paid by ABN AMRO. So everybody was on the payroll of ABN AMRO, and almost nobody had equity in the startups they were building. So the risk profile was completely different.
Yeah.
The choices you make because you have a different risk profile are, in my opinion, different because the outcome and the payments are not completely aligned. When you're a startup founder, so your goal is to build that startup because you want to increase the value of the startup as much as possible because your main compensation is in equity. And here people had just really well paid jobs, and we're trying to build companies on the side.
Yeah. Does that, you mentioned there about decision making, do you reckon that plays a big factor in the decisions you make when it's not your risk to take in when you make decisions?
I think it has a really big impact. Yeah. Because for most startup founders, it's all or nothing. So the culture I saw sometimes at the bank, not for all my colleagues, but some of the colleagues, it was 9 to 5 and they left and they went home to the kids, to the wife, had a good weekend. Most startup founders I know, it's all or nothing, man. Yeah. It's basically they work their asses off because they know if they fail, it's going to feel bad. It's going to feel bad. And if a venture fails at a corporate venture builder, at least there you still got your job, you still got your monthly paycheck, so there's not that much risk, so your life doesn't change. But when you're a startup founder, for most people, you end up with almost nothing. Your reputation is gone, your money is gone, so you have to start over from scratch. So the urge to win and the urge to make it a success is so much bigger, in my opinion.
Yeah, and it's a tough one because in many ways, when you're not making a decision which is kind of like you said, all or nothing, it must kind of help you in many ways, kind of take a step back and you're not that passion to do it, but at the same time, do you think it's a negative thing as well? Because if it's all or nothing, you're going to put everything into that decision, into making that product work. Is there pros and cons to both?
Yeah, definitely, man. I think you're spot on that you say sometimes anxiety can kick in. So if it's all or nothing and you can't fail, it's pretty hard to sometimes make the decision and to keep it rational.
Yeah.
And you also have this reality distortion field they sometimes talk about with founders. And at one hand, it's good because they see reality different than it is currently, and they want to shape that reality. But also sometimes they can just not look at objectively anymore because they so need to win. So they don't see reality, and they see stuff. They look at data different, and they become just over optimistic about what they see.
How would you help someone? How would you help a founder? What would you say to them in that situation? Is it important they kind of reach out to other people, to a support group to help them?
I think being a founder can be really lonely.
Yeah.
So because you make all the tough decisions. So I think a good support group or a good support network is important.
Yeah.
And also, I think the hardship and emotions that come and the stress that come, I think it's really important to do the work on that and to know where it comes from and how to deal with it when it hits you. So I think what I've seen in the startup world is that we over glorify success and we only talk about success. So when you talk to most startup founders, most of the time they always say, I'm doing fine, it's going great, I'm going to the next round, the product is kicking ass. But yeah, if you just look at the numbers, not everybody can be rocking it, because I think the number is 7 out of 10 startups fail. So there must also be a lot of startups that are not succeeding. But you don't hear that stories because it's really hard to be vulnerable and to open up. So I think to have a support group, advisors, mentors, where you can also talk about the emotional side. And how to deal with that and how to deal with that stress. Because I can imagine when you have 20 people working for you and you're responsible for the monthly paychecks and their families and maybe the mortgages. The stress can be immense.
Yeah, and that's something we're going to go into in just kind of rewind a little bit and take me back to what you're up to now. So how did your career develop? Obviously, you're doing some really good stuff at the moment, helping people. One in particular project you've got is Growth Tribe with David, someone else we're going to have on the show. So just talk me through kind of what you've been up to the last few years as such and what you're up to at the moment, mate.
So after ABN AMRO, I joined Startup Bootcamp.
Yeah.
And I worked for them as a lean evangelist. So I developed a lean startup program where we coached all the startups on experimentation and business model development and growth strategy. Then I left. I started working with a lot of corporates. So I helped a lot of corporates set up corporate startups. And then from coaching teams, it went to coaching a portfolio of teams, and then more to strategy, and then to building complete innovation governance frameworks. So that's basically my career. It went from team coaching to portfolio to helping whole organizations implement innovation over time.
It's an interesting one, that, because I'm getting a lot of the same qualities in coaching a team and coaching a whole organization are very similar. What do you reckon the biggest difference is, though? What do you think the biggest change in coaching a team and coaching a whole organization?
I think the amount of complexity you have to deal with. So organizations are complex organisms where there's a lot of interactions and power balances you need to keep track of. And the bigger the organization, the more interactions there are, and that makes it sometimes difficult to move towards a more self-learning or innovating organization. If you look from a more traditional point of view, most organizations are designed to basically don't evolve. Because if you look, for example, at compliance or legal or branding, we sometimes call them the antidotes of the organization, because they're there to protect the base core organization of stopping or of being killed off. So it's basically to protect the core business. But what you try to do with innovation is you try to change the core business or build an adjacent business. So a lot of the organization is not used to dealing with change because it's designed to not deal with change and keep change outside of the door. So that sometimes is one of the hard things of doing innovation change work in big corporations, to how to deal with those objections and how to get also those people on board to slowly change the organization.
That's really, really interesting, because when I speak to people And it was a question I was actually going to pop to you next, about the challenges in starting a business and what people go through. It's very rare that when I've sat down with people, I've heard about the company actually fighting each other. And that's a really, really interesting insight, which I'm sure a lot of people don't even consider, when they're starting a business, that, you've got this core, which is going in this direction, but the innovation really needs to come in as well. And it's kind of fighting that and negotiating around that and learning how to develop the business without losing what's keeping it alive at the end of the day as well. So that's really, really interesting. And yeah, I mean, in terms of other challenges as well, what else do you see as a coach? What do you kind of come across in starting a business the main challenges are, and how do you help people with that?
I think two of the biggest challenges in big corporates is, one, how to put the customer central again. So how to really start having good customer conversations, start learning from your customers again, and be vulnerable and really listen and not just push ideas forward that you think are good. So how to really develop products together with customers and having that good customer interaction.
Okay.
And the other one is building an experimentation culture, because we're so used to celebrating success. So in the most big corporates I work in, the only way to advance your career is to always be successful. You go from successful project to successful project, and it's pretty hard to accept that failure exists, and then also to celebrate failure, because most people don't understand, in order to make progress, you need to learn, and in order to learn, also sometimes stuff doesn't work. Yeah. So I think we have to reframe what failure looks like.
Yeah, they're so intertwined. You need to be able to fail to understand where to improve and what to do right. If you were a startup and you were going from success to success, how would you look at them? How would you advise them and say, well, something you need to fail? You need to, how do you get that into someone's head who's successful? How do you get to that point? How do you tell people that?
Show me one startup that has success after success after success without failing in between. So I think you're pitching a situation that doesn't exist, to be honest.
Yeah.
And if it exists, you're not looking objectively enough at the data.
Okay.
And I think we also have to rephrase what failure looks like. So for me, a failure is only a situation where we don't learn. So even if we build something, it doesn't work, as long as we learn from it, for me, it's a successful experiment. So success for me is, as long as we keep on learning, if we keep on improving, I think then we're making progress. So
yeah, I like that.
And it could be, if you're successful all the time, then my first question would be, are you challenging yourself hard enough? Are you pushing again hard enough against the boundaries, or are we only testing things that we should already know? Because if your gut feeling is always right, are we only testing stuff that's already known?
Yeah.
And are we taking enough risk in trying to evolve this business? Because the hard thing is, when you're building a startup, is the only competitive advantage is the speed of learning, because you have less resources than a corporate, you have less contacts, you have most likely less customers. So the only competitive advantage you have is the speed of learning. The faster you learn, the faster you will grow.
Yeah, I love that. That's so true. I think from anyone I've spoken to, it's important to fail and learn. I think that's the key here. You need to learn from your mistakes and make things better and improve and innovate, as you said earlier. But how do you look objectively? Is that why, if you're a single founder, is that why it's so important from a very early stage to get people involved in kind of advising and helping?
Yeah, I see my role most of the time as a mirror. So I'm just mirroring and asking questions to help people look from different perspectives to what they're doing.
Yeah.
Because when you're a single co-founder, the problem is everyone has biases. And also, we already talked about the reality distortion field. I think most entrepreneurs, if they knew what they would be up against, they wouldn't start the journey. So I think as an entrepreneur, in order to succeed, you have to be a little bit crazy. You have to be over optimistic.
Yeah.
But you also need to have somebody around that helps you to be a little bit realistic and helps you to reflect when necessary. And yeah, that can be built in different ways. So sometimes you do it as a coach. So you hire someone to have a weekly conversation with. It could also be a peer group. So I've been part of a Brain Trust, which was a a bi-weekly meeting with 3 entrepreneurial friends where we talked about our businesses for 50 minutes per person, and we started asking each other's questions and helping each other basically think through different difficult challenges we had.
Yeah.
Or you could have your co-founders in your company or advisors. There's so many options, but
yeah.
I think building in reflection, because one of the biggest mistakes I see is that most people are working in their company. So they're running and running and running, but they're not working at the company. They don't take enough time to reflect, to zoom out, to really think through, to strategize, to see what's happening around them, what's the impact of the data. So most entrepreneurs are so busy running that there's no time for reflection. But I think that's where the real magic happens. So the moment you zoom out, you reflect and really start to think, that's where you really learn. And you really see what's the impact of the information you gathered and how it impacts the different decisions you need to make.
Yeah, just on the brain trust, actually, just kind of flipping back to that, just for people out there who think that's a really good idea, I'd love to do something like that. Does it have to be a company which in the same field as you, or can it literally just be another leader?
I think there's pluses for both. If it's the same industry, it might be easier to dive into specific challenges to that specific industry.
Yeah.
But if it's other industries or other different type of business models, people could give different perspectives.
Yeah.
So I would say see it as an experiment. If you want to do this, try to gather some people, say we're going to do this 5 times. After 5 times, we're going to evaluate, see if this has value, see if you have to change the format, and see how we can even create more value. That's how I normally go through life. I see most things I do as an experiment. I try to set up front, okay, what do I want to get out of it? How do I know if this is going to be successful? How will I measure if I will be successful? And then I run the experiment and look at the data afterwards. And I think that's how you should approach this as well. So the first question is, what's the problem you're solving for yourself? Then there could be different solutions where brain trust is one. Then you pick which experiment you want to run, a brain trust, an advisor, a coach, and then you evaluate after a certain period if that experiment was actually successful and created value for you.
Yeah, and you mentioned there, you were kind of describing SMART goals and really kind of making sure that you have very specific and clear and measurable goals. Is it also important that everything you do as a leader, as an entrepreneur, you should make everything about measurable, specific goals, what you can kind of work out how you're going to get to a certain point and what you've achieved by doing that?
Could be. I think it depends on your. 5 years ago, I would have said yes, because I really believe in a structured way of learning, and that building a startup could also almost be like an engineering problem you can solve, which running experiments and learning.
Yeah.
But I've also seen that there's also people that really have just really good gut feeling, and they just follow their gut feeling, and they work more with soft data instead of really hard data, and they're also super successful. So I think there's not one way. I really believe in a scientific way of building startups. So I'm really a scientific oriented person that likes to measure things and to make decisions based on data. And I personally believe that leads to the best decisions.
Yeah.
But that doesn't have to hold true for everyone. And sometimes you also have to remember that it sometimes can take a lot of time to do it really structured and collect enough data.
Yeah.
To really make good decisions. And sometimes you don't have that time, or sometimes it's just too expensive to collect all the data. So you have to take decisions with incomplete data, partly based on gut feeling. And I think that's also what entrepreneurship is. It's part science, part art. I think if my assumption would be, if we would take 2 startup founders, we give them the same idea, we don't let them talk for a year, and we put them, and they have the same access to the same capital, the same resources, the same customers. After a year, it will be 2 completely different startups, because there's so much micro decisions that need to be made that influence the direction of the startup, and that's basically all based on past experience of the founder, the biases he has in reading the data, looking at the data. So I think there's not one good way of building a startup. I believe data-driven decision making and informed decision making is super important. That would be my advice, but I think there's a balance to strike there.
Yeah, it's weird that, and I think you're completely right in the fact that, you know, if you put two people with the same project, it turn out completely differently. And I think that that's really interesting, how a startup isn't just a business. It isn't just a, like you say, kind of data and structure. There's so much more to it, and just the personality and the past experiences of each founder can change things and change the direction, which I think is really, really interesting. One thing you have said quite a few times, and we've touched on, is to be vulnerable. What do you mean by being vulnerable as a startup founder?
I think, yeah, in order to be able to learn, you have to go behind your ego.
Yeah.
So a lot of startup founders I know are really strong personalities. They have really strong visions. They have a really strong drive, and they know this is what I want to do, and this is how I think success looks like. But in the way, you will hit roadblocks. You will basically not be right all the time. And I think you need vulnerability to be able to deal with it and to really learn from it and to really reflect and also look at yourself. So what do I need to learn from this? Also, the different phases of a company, a 3-person startup company is completely different than a 200-person company where you're still the CEO. So the challenges you have to go through and the challenges you have to face as a startup founder are just immense. And I think if you are not vulnerable, or if you're not able to reflect on your own behavior and see, where do I need to learn? What are patterns that are not good behavior and that are not enabling the people around me to do their best work, because I'm basically prohibiting them to do their best work because I feel certain anxiety, or I feel a certain pain, and I react from that anxiety of that pain instead of out of a good place. I think that's where some work can and needs to be done to be a better leader.
Yeah. And you talk about that. You just mentioned, you know, being a better leader. Is there an importance, you know, in workshops? What kind of importance do they have in your learning as a leader? Is it important to attend them and kind of participate them and continue to develop your skills as a leader?
Yeah, definitely. I just believe that life is one long learning journey. My mantra is, what do I need to learn today to be more successful tomorrow? And what's the best way to learn it? And that's also when I talk to people or coach people, that's the first question that I ask them. Yeah, and I think there's so many great techniques. For example, one of the techniques that has helped me the most is the breathing techniques from Wim Hof. So I've been working with a breath coach. This has helped me to basically release tension, reach deeper levels in myself, and deal with pain from the past, which has helped me a lot to show up differently in meetings, to be less triggered, and basically become a better person.
I like that. So it's not necessarily, you know, you go to a workshop to sit there with a pen and paper and, you know, write down a load of things. It can be about different things, whether it be breathing and dealing with past pain, which we've already said influences decisions today, or whether it is, you know, kind of doing a workshop on leadership maybe, or some training on that. You know, it can be so many different things. People just need to be open to the idea of and the value of attending these workshops. How do people get involved in that? Is there any tips you'd give for people looking to kind of learn new things or develop themselves as a leader?
It all starts with, what do you want to work on and what do you want to learn? One thing I really believe in is 360 feedback. So asking the people around you how they see you, how they think you react, what they think you need to learn, because we see ourselves differently than other people see ourselves, and sometimes we have a lot of blind spots. So that's one of the things where I should start, and then really reflect on those conversations and really see, what do you want to do with it and which parts of yourself do you want to develop, and then just look around, have talks with people, Google what kind of workshops or what kind of coaches could help you in that journey.
Yeah, you mentioned coaches there, but there are various ways, and something we've touched on before is kind of coaching versus consulting versus training. Would you mind just kind of going into a little bit of detail about them and the differences between going through some coaching and getting a coaching like yourself, or going to training? What's kind of the differences between the three?
Yeah, for me, so I always say I have 3 roles. The first one is coach. And a coach for me is a person that really helps you to get better and really walks beside you and really helps you by asking questions, by not giving direction, but just asking questions and helping you to reflect.
Yeah.
And helping you to enable to find the answers that are already locked in inside of yourself. So it's basically just a tool or a mirror to get deeper insight into yourself. A consultant is somebody that helps you to solve problems. He brings knowledge, he brings certain experience, and you together work towards and solving a problem. And if you talk in the startup world, most people talk about lean startup coaches, but most of them are actually lean startup consultants. So that's one of the most important things I've learned last year. I did a coaching course and I thought I knew how to be a coach, but I didn't. I basically have been a consultant all my life. I love telling people what to do. I love to solve problems. I love to give advice. And when I started to do the coaching course, they said, yeah, stop it. You're not here to give advice. They already know the answer. Your goal is to guide them towards the answer and ask questions. You don't need to know. This is your own patterns, your own triggers that you're trying to solve by being the smartest in the room. So why do you need to be the smartest in the room? That's the question my trainer asked. So, and that's the training part. So a trainer for me is somebody that helps people to learn new skills by really giving a dedicated training program. And when I work with teams, those are the three different roles I normally take. So I think I'm most 80% or 70% consultant, 10% coach, 20% trainer most of the time. I would like to move more to coaching because I think it's super interesting to work with the shadow sides and the deeper and really help people become better versions of themselves. But it has been an interesting journey.
That's so interesting because literally when we first mentioned them three things, I was like, they're the same thing, right? I didn't know the difference, and I bet people listening, I did not know the difference between all that, and I think it's so important to kind of take a step back and understand, how you're helping people as well. And even yourself, you've kind of gone for a coaching course and kind of said, you mentioned one of the things you said earlier, what do I need to improve? And that's kind of making yourself vulnerable again, because people can come back to you and go, well, you need to improve your coaching because you're not coaching, you're training, you're consulting. Yeah, I think that's really, really cool that even yourself as a coach, went to a coaching course to be a better coach. So it just shows that no matter your level, your seniority, or how experienced you are, you can always improve, right? And I think that's an important thing as an entrepreneur. So we talked about failure, but what does startup success actually look like? What is startup success? Because it doesn't have to mean you've gone from a one-person founded company to a 200-person corporate company. Or does it differentiate between different companies or different people?
I think this is a really hard question
to
answer because I think it differs from person to person. My definition of success would be creating sustainable, long-lasting value. One of the things I would like to argue that most big startups we know, for example, Uber, which for me, Uber isn't a success yet because basically they don't have a proven business model. If they don't have a profitable business model, they have a proven business model, they don't have a profitable business model. So Uber was still losing a lot of money per ride. So on unit economic level, they weren't profitable. So they have a huge scaling business, but it's all fueled by investor money. So the business model was to basically build a high valuation and do an IPO. Yeah. So the early investors and the early employees could basically cash in on that success. But is that success? Because and then we're not even talking about the effects they have on society, like how they deal with labor issues because everybody is a freelancer, nobody's having insurances, etc. So I think everybody has to find their own definition of success. But for me, it would be a sustainable, profitable, growing business.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. How it was a great example. Many people would say, wow, they've done so well. What a success story that is. But it's how you look at it, like you just said, they're kind of growing to IPO. Whereas, you could have a small 6-7 person company turning over profit every year, very sustainable, and not growing to the size of Uber or the depth of that.
The main question is, what kind of entrepreneur do you want to be, and what does your road to success need to look like? So you have people that want to swing for the fences. So with Uber, it's all or nothing. So if they weren't able to close the next round, it basically the company's going to fail. You see that WeWork. So WeWork was funding, and then basically it stopped because it was hyper overvalued. And then basically it all inflates. So is that the play you want to do? It's a completely different startup. So most people think, okay, I need to raise money, but what most people don't understand, when you start raising money, you adopt the business model of the investor. Most investors want you to swing to the fence because the business model of the investor is to invest into 10 companies, and one of them has to be highly successful, and they don't care. It's not that simplistic, but they don't care if some of them fail, because that's part of their business model. So you're being pushed to have that enormous growth. So the question is, are you the right entrepreneur for it? Is your business model ready for it? Is your company ready for it? Is your organization ready for it? And can you deal with that constant focus and constant growth? Or do you want to build it more in a sustainable pace? And are you fine with having a decent, what people call a lifestyle business, where you basically can live really well with your business, but it's not growing that hard, and you're not going to be that next unicorn that's going to have the big IPO? I think that's a really important conversation to have. And I think if you look to the media, we over-glorify the big IPO stories, and there's not enough stories about the small companies that are bootstrapped and that are successful, and that basically are the engine behind most of the engine behind the economy. Which are also really nice businesses to build and to have.
I think that's really interesting. And, I think relating that to Amsterdam, obviously Uber based there among many, many other startups. How important is the startup ecosystem? Firstly, what is the startup ecosystem? What is that? And if you don't mind kind of touching on that a little bit more.
For me, it's again learning. So in order to build businesses, you need knowledge, you need people, and you need capital. And if you have a good ecosystem, they're all there. So you have investors that are willing to take risks, and investors willing to to help founders based on their knowledge and their money. You have founders that are eager to build new stuff. Most of the time, you also want to have an ecosystem in a market that's ripe for that has a good infrastructure to launch new products, where there's a lot of consumers that are open to new products. So for example, the Netherlands is a good market because apparently where technology adoption is really high, people are highly educated, so it's a good market to launch new products in and test new products in. And then the last one is you need good people. And I think you can tell more about it because you work in HR. I don't, but it's all about the people. In order to build companies, you need people to work with, and the more good people attract more good people because people want to live here. And I think the benefit we have in Amsterdam, that's just a great city to live in. It's a small city. We have a lot of cultural institutions. We have a lot of good restaurants. You can do everything by bike. So the pace of living and the quality of living in the Netherlands is really good. I think that's one of the main reasons Uber is here, Booking is here, and then other startups are here, because a lot of people just like to live here.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think, you mentioned obviously culture there. It's a word what's kind of thrown around now, but it's so important in these companies now in growing. And Amsterdam, I think one big thing as well, we had the guys on from Startup Amsterdam, and they were talking about how they kind of help people, and the government actually really supports startups and companies in hiring and helping them actually bring people in from maybe abroad, relocate people. They actually incentivize that, and also train people, to really grow the business and create a really positive culture. So I think that's really important. I think, it's true what you say there, that it does play a part, but it's kind of like how you want to grow the business. Just going back to the investment side of things as well, from what you were saying, it's so true that, if you get investment, there is a direction placed upon you from that investor. You have to do things maybe in a certain way. You have to grow at a certain rate for them to reinvest maybe further down the line. If you're a startup founder and you've got a really good idea and you do want to grow the business, but you haven't got the capital to do that, but then you're worried that investment will change the direction of the business. Is there a way around that? Is there anything you can do to actually find people who let you run the business how you want to, for example?
you need resources to build. So the question is, how do you pay those resources? So money is one, but you can also might be able to pay with equity. So maybe you can find people to take risk and that want to go on this journey to take risk with you together. Or maybe you can bootstrap it by doing consulting work or doing a side job where you funnel the money into the startup. I don't know if that's the best way to go, but there's a lot of options other than raising funding. I think most of the time you just have to get creative. And then the speed of building that startup will be a little bit slower. But there's also the question, what kind of investors do you get on board? Not all investors want you to build that next unicorn. Yeah. So it really depends on, and also how much money do you need? Because some startups just need to keep on raising money, and other startups just raise once and then they have enough money to basically build a sustainable business. So it's also depending on what trajectory you see towards profitability.
Just speaking to you, you can tell how important it is to have someone like you kind of coaching or supporting, because you're asking these questions what you probably know you need to answer, but you don't know the answer to them. And just by asking them questions, by you saying things like, how do you want to grow? What kind of investment do you want? What, it kind of opens your mind to, okay, these are the answers I need to get in order to really grow this business, or in order to make it a sustainable business, or in order to get investment. It's so important to have questions like that, isn't it? And that's where I think someone like yourself comes in and helps. So how would people, just on that, mate, how would people get in touch with someone like you, or you in particular, should I say? How would people get in touch with you to kind of help? Do you look at certain businesses, or are you happy to help anyone?
I like to work on stuff that's exciting to me. But people can always reach me and hire me to work with them. I think the biggest challenge is in the beginning, most startups don't want to spend money on a coach, to be honest. So most rather hire an extra developer or an extra marketeer than spend money on a coach, because they think it's more important to build product than actually to really start and learn how to learn. So most of my work I've been doing is actually with accelerators and incubators. So programs that support entrepreneurs in those programs, and those programs pay for my involvement. Instead of that, I work directly with startups.
Yeah. And what's the future then for you? Are you going to keep doing what you're doing you mentioned there, you want to be more of a coach. What's the future got for you, mate? What have you got planned?
Yesterday I signed up for a course to become a breathwork coach. So to get certified as a breathwork coach, because that's something that has brought me so much that I want to be able to help others with that as well. So that's something I want to do. Cool. And in the long run, I think I want to move more from consultant to coach. So I think in a year or two, I would like to work with senior executives or startup founders, also more on their personal journey, to really help them and enable them to become better leaders and the best version of themselves, to really also reflect on, why do I behave in a certain way, and where does it come from, and how can I behave better, and how can I become the best leader I am. Basically ask those type of questions, and maybe organize retreats or do longer stints of coaching where I see people on a bi-weekly basis. I don't know. This is I'm still shaping it in my head, but that's the direction I'm thinking of going.
Yeah, that's really cool. The retreat stuff, I think it's so important to take a step back as a leader.
Yeah, I think the most important thing I've learned is that by learning to know myself, I've become so much stronger, and I've become such a better tool also to others. So that's also the journey I would like to help other people with. Yeah, I think it's just amazing. The deeper you go, the more you learn, the more whole you become.
Yeah, and I think you've kind of answered my final question there, but I wanted to ask you kind of what was the best piece of advice you've ever received?
For me today, it would be to go inside and also look at your shadow sides. So look at the sides you don't want to know of yourself and put them into the light. There's this really great podcast it's called Reboot. It's from an ex-VC that went to Tibet and then now is a founder coach. And he says, welcome to the human race. We all think we're perfect, but every human isn't perfect. And he says, as long as you start to see also where you're imperfect, and come to terms with that, also that part of yourself, you become more human. And I think that's so powerful.
Yeah, very, very, very powerful, mate. Listen, thank you so much, mate, for coming on the podcast. I was really excited, and And I hope everyone listening knows why I was excited about today, because there's so much information there. I mean, you might have to listen to this twice to kind of to absorb all that. But I think a lot of it is about kind of learning and developing as a person, and not just as a leader as well. And obviously, you know, finding the importance in certain things, workshops, training, consulting, you know, failing was one thing we touched on, and being vulnerable. But yeah, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed coming on the showcase. Thank you very much.
I did. Thank you.
Good. No, and everyone listening, please do check out Keess's LinkedIn, my LinkedIn. We're always going to be sharing stuff and information. And obviously we'll post some snippets out as well across LinkedIn with more information, and all the links will be on there as well. So thanks guys for listening to Starting to Scale again. Cheers.